kind of like music with a little funk beat. So Herbie Hancock wrote a nice tune called Cantaloupe Island. Thank you very much. So that was the history kind of like of the jazz trumpet players. After like 1960, it never kind of really went anywhere. Kind of died, and that was the end of it. And, because see, like, it's funny thing about jazz is that jazz has always been like innovated and best played by young musicians. And when the young musicians stopped getting interested in jazz, that was kind of like the end of jazz. For instance, when I was coming up in the 60s, if you played a jazz tune that was like 4 months old, you were considered not hip and square, you know? So, like, you had to be really hip to what was happening at the time. You had to really know what was coming out at the time. And all the music was exciting. Man, did you hear what Miles came out with? Man, did you hear what Cannonball Adderley was coming out with? So everything was like really cool. So the music changed by every 4 or 5 months, something new and exciting was coming on. But here it is, this is 2010 and a half. And one of the hippest tunes that is played now is like Giant Steps. And a lot of people can't play it because it's like really hip. But Giant Steps was written in 1958. And people are saying, yeah, I'm really cool because I can play Giant Steps. So my point is that if jazz is going to be furtherly developed, as I said, furtherly, I made that up. Yeah. Thank you, you like that word? Yeah, you can use it, I get 10%. So if it's going to be furtherly developed, it has to be developed by young people, you know, like, as we say in Texas, like y'all. Because I've had my era, and my era was great for me. But jazz hasn't progressed really in 60 years because the rest of you guys haven't taken it to a different level because you like are doing some other stuff. Anyway, that concludes our performance spot here at John Muir High School. Give yourselves a nice round of applause for being such a wonderful and attentive audience. On behalf of Mr. Don Wyatt on keyboards, Stephen Foster on drums, Louis Taylor on saxophone. He's lost a lot of weight, you better see it now. And Robert Russell on bass. I'm Noah Cheyenne, thank you very much. We have the John Muir High School Jazz Band, who's going to come up and perform something for us.
That was an awesome afternoon. The John Muir Jazz Band came up and did an absolutely great job. And if you were viewing this series, the John Muir Jazz Band was in series number 2, performing, doing what they do, and we were able to get some shots in from that on that particular video, and also some shots in the classroom because the musicians, Mr. Don Wyatt, Stephen Foster, myself, and our musical director, Mr. Nolan Shahid, had the opportunity to go on campus the day before at the rehearsal with the John Muir Jazz Ensemble, speak with those students directly, and also the opportunity to have dialogue with the musical director of John Muir, who was an absolutely fantastic gentleman that gave us a lot of support in what we were doing. In terms of the legacy of jazz and what's really going on, again, with the Jammin Foundation, I wanted to kind of take an emphasis on what we have in our background here and kind of going with, if you give me one of the shots, that's where I'm going to go and start to speak on, and that is with my man, Charlie Parker. Now, this is absolutely a wonderful shot. It was done by Herman Leonard in that collection. I actually had the opportunity to meet him personally. This collection and these shots are of absolute value for a collector and those that have Mr. Leonard's work with his signature has a valuable piece. But notwithstanding the artistic eye of the photographer, which we are looking at, we also have the understanding and the absolute feeling of great jazz by the Birdman himself. What I want to do is, if we take the Birdman, Mr. Charlie Parker, and fly to the other side, we're going to see a gentleman that had and made a major part of jazz. And that's a great shot because Miles Davis, I think Nolan Shahid made a major point as he related to his mutes and what Miles Davis brought to the music world, coming from the Dixieland jazz into another form of jazz. Now, the reason I'm saying that this is an absolute wonderful shot from the standpoint of the Jammin Foundation is Miles Davis grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois. Miles Davis' father was a dentist, and there was one major high school in East St. Louis, Illinois, and that was Lincoln High. The other photo of the drummer is my dad, Jimmy Owens. My dad is also from East St. Louis, Illinois, and also went to Lincoln High School and was a couple of years prior to ahead of Miles Davis. And my mother, which you don't see her picture, she was not in music, but it is my family. And the reason for me learning music and understanding what it is was actually the best friend of Miles Davis' first wife, and they all grew up together in that city. Now, what had happened in my family is my grandfather, my dad's father, had the opportunity to do networking as we do now. And he was an entrepreneur, and he had several children. He had 4 boys and 3 girls, and needed a dentist. Miles Davis' father was the dentist. And so my grandfather traded the dentist in his networking and opportunities to utilize what we have to achieve what we desire, and traded him that trumpet for dental work for my dad. So that ended up being Miles Davis' first horn, which is just kind of a little tit for tat. Back to the aspect of history, then what had happened for me in growing up in music, we lived here in the city of Los Angeles. A lot of the musicians back in the early 50s were coming out from the Midwest and stayed at the house. So it was a lot of jam sessions going on in my living room. And you know, pretty soon it begins to take over and you find your why you cry. And the why that I cry was the reason that Miss Doll Scott McDuff said, well, look here, what can you do and how can you continue to keep this legacy going with the Jammin Foundation that I founded? I said, well, why do you think I'll be the one to be able to do that? She says, I see what you're doing with your dad. keeping the legacy alive. And that was the fact that I conducted and continue to maneuver an opportunity to present the Jimmy Owens Jazz Ensemble on a continuous basis after he, what we call, rest in peace. He had passed, but then the legacy had to continue to go. And that's why we work in the Jammin Foundation with our kids, our children, our future. And that's what Doll Scott McDuff was doing. As an absolute wonderful singer, she developed the Jammin Foundation 2000 and began to be sure that we had an understanding of how we can help musicians and continue to keep the legacy alive and keep jazz alive and on stage. That is our presentation in the Jazz Zone, and what we call this is Jammin' in the Zone. And that's the Jammin Foundation and the Jazz Zone with a collaborative effort to keep it happening. It is, again, my pleasure to say, enjoy life with God's blessings. Thank you for tuning in. This was our completed series, Music Clinic Part 4. There you go. That's my story, and I'm going to stick to it.
All that I ask is that you love me. All that I ask is that you care. Now I've known times of being lonely and how it feels to be blue, needing someone to love me only. That one and only can be you. So darling, all that I ask is for your love, dear, to have and to hold forevermore, yes, forevermore. Sure as the skies are blue, you can bet that I love you. Darling, all that I ask is just a chance to prove my love is true.